What's up, drinking buddies? Wally here. It's football season, that special time of year where jocks rule the earth and nerds typically go into hibernation till at least Halloween. But that doesn't have to be the case. The NFL is basically just season 52 of the world's longest running serialized series. So in an effort to help clue my fellow nerds in on what exactly is going on in the NFL, I'm going to go over all 32 teams and explain where exactly all the teams are heading into the 2017 season. Using analogies you just might understand. Okay, so we're going to go division by division, starting with the AFC East, home of the defending Super Bowl champions, New England Patriots. Now, the New England Patriots can be best described as Darth Vader. But as it stands now, they're basically just youngling murdering cheaters who have more rings right now than any other team in most of our lifetimes. Next up is the Dolphins, who are like Echo the Dolphin. They're dolphins. Also, a bunch of people who are older than you remember when they had this awesome game on the Sega Genesis. Much like how Dolphin fans won't let you forget about their one undefeated season so many years ago. Basically, no real relevance today. Then we have the Buffalo Bills, who are kinda like the show Community. The Bills went to 4 straight Super Bowls and won exactly none of them. They had some real momentum for a few years, but since their peak, they've been a shell of their former selves. You might keep getting excited to see them come back, but in the end, it's just never quite right. Lastly in this division, you have the New York Jets, who are kinda like Nemo from Finding Nemo. Both of them have fans who love them, despite the fact that they're basically just swimming around with one fin. Oh, and they both made big statements of their personality by touching a butt. Next up is the AFC North. And first, we have the Pittsburgh Steelers, who are an awful lot like Gandalf from Lord of the Rings. They've been around for a long time, there are lots of stories about their awesomeness, and their reputation definitely precedes them. However, they do disappear from time to time, but when they show back up, they're usually ready to dominate. Then you have the Baltimore Ravens, who are an awful lot like Gandalf from The Hobbit. They're newer, more or less built the same as Gandalf from Lord of the Rings, but somehow lesser. Still, they're more than capable of being awesome. Next you have the Cleveland Browns, who are basically the Scarlet Spider / Ben Reilly. They're technically a clone of a classic NFL team, but they're not very good, and have a costume uniform that's reminiscent of the original, but filled with dated tropes. Oh, and no one likes them. And lastly, the Cincinnati Bengals, who are basically the Beagle Boys. They seem like they might be tough, and they can be intimidating in that looks like a bunch of escaped inmates sort of way. But in reality, when it comes down to it, they're always ready to be beat by a couple of junior woodchucks. And then we move on to the AFC South, and we'll start with the Houston Texans, who you could say are similar to Neville Longbottom. If you look at them on paper, they look like they could be the chosen one. Like had things had gone slightly differently here or there, they would be the one everyone is cheering for in the end. Instead, they usually just blow something up or bumble their way to some comedic pratfall. Then we have the Tennessee Titans, who are kinda like X-Force. They used to be the Oilers, much like X-Force used to be the New Mutants. The Titans were a little more popular than the Oilers, and they both changed their looks to be way more 90s. Somehow, of all the X side teams, X-Force keeps chugging along in new forms, much like the Titans' shocking ability to stay somewhat relevant year in and year out. Then you have the Indianapolis Colts, who could best be described as Starscream. They were basically the number 2 to New England's Megatron for a while, continually trying to best them over and over, but they were pretty consistently beaten down. And lastly, the Jacksonville Jaguars, who I would say are kinda like Ewoks. At first you look at them and think, aw, cute, but they're very old school, and have some real bite if they can get organized. They've even won a few battles that don't make a ton of sense, but here they are, still chugging along. And to round out the AFC, you have the West. Here you have the Oakland Raiders, who are a little like Jack Sparrow. They like to put on a tough guy, piratey exterior, but in reality, they're a bit bumbling and are often screwing up. In the end, they had glory in their past, and these days, they have a little swagger, and inexplicably, still have some opportunities for glory in the future. Then you have the Denver Broncos, who remind me of Phoenix or Jean Grey. They've been a power for a long time, continually resurrecting themselves. And their Orange Crush uniforms are basically the jersey equivalent to huge flowing red hair. Then you have the Kansas City Chiefs, who are a bit like Jon Snow, unassuming at first, but basically good most of the time. They have a tremendous home field advantage. Just as few would want to go battle Jon Snow in the north, few would want to go into Arrowhead and play football against the Chiefs. And soon enough, they might just be king. And lastly, the Los Angeles Chargers, who are a bit like Jack Black in Tenacious D in The Pick of Destiny. They moved to LA hoping to find fans because no one liked them back home. They can be really fun to watch and often make you think this might be the real deal. In the end though, it always falls apart, and it's usually better to watch the music videos or highlights rather than the whole season. Moving on to the NFC, the East, headlined by the Dallas Cowboys, who are basically Gilderoy Lockhart. Everyone talks about them, mainstream culture loves them, and their fans tell stories of all the awesome things they've done way back in the day. These days though, they're basically just blowhards who've achieved equally as much in the playoffs as Lockhart did as Defense Against the Dark Arts teacher. Then you have the New York Giants, who are basically like the X-Men movie franchise. Unbelievably, they've had multiple recent championships, but when they don't win it all, they're usually pretty poor. Somehow they're still kicking around though, and you can never truly count them out. Well, it is until you've actually watched Apocalypse. Then you have the Washington Redskins, who are basically any Orson Scott Card novel. Look, there's some good here. They have some history of success, but at the end of the day, only diehards can stomach the blatant, offensive elephant in the room. And lastly, the Philadelphia Eagles, who are basically Roger Klotz. They're green and they're jerks. It's a blessing that they've never won it all, because a fan base that once threw batteries at Santa Claus doesn't deserve to enjoy the sweet thrill of ultimate victory. If they won it all, it would feel like the bullies have won, and no one wants that. And then we have the NFC South, starting with the New Orleans Saints, who are kind of like True Detective. Once they hit relevancy, their story was incredible, capturing the nation's attention with a tale set amid the backdrop of a desolate bayou. After that first hit story though, they tried to repeat it, continually missing the point and being just a general disappointment to everyone. Then you have the Atlanta Falcons, who are kind of like Rick Grimes from Walking Dead. Sometimes the Falcons look like leaders and heroes. Oftentimes they're making stupid decisions and yelling at the refs like Rick yells at Carl. Even though they're splashy and highly rated, their trophy case is as bare as The Walking Dead's Emmy cabinet. And then the Carolina Panthers, who are basically bizarro. They like to think that they look like Superman. Their quarterback even does a "me am Superman" pose in the end zone. But at the end of the day, looking the part doesn't make you Superman, and their constant inconsistency and hope-destroying play makes fools of all of their fans. And to round out this division, the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, who are kind of like Captain Hook. Look, technically they're pirates, and that should be intimidating, right? But much like James Hook, they have a hard time beating kids and routinely find themselves at the bottom of the standings. You will often hear people talk about them early in the season, but like most comical villains, they're not really relevant by the end. And then you have the NFC West, starting with the Los Angeles Rams, who are kind of like Samwise Gamgee. They recently returned home after a long adventure where they had some success. Now they're the mayor of LA Football Town, which is about as relevant to the NFL as Hobbiton is to Middle-earth. Then you have the Seattle Seahawks, or the Tywin Lannister of the NFL. Not above cheating to win. In fact, their whole philosophy is cheat so often that they cannot possibly punish you every single time. They're feared in the league by reputation, and when doubted, have an uncanny ability to eke out a decisive win to keep everyone in check. They probably kick puppies for fun too. Then you have the San Francisco 49ers, who are kind of like Obi-Wan Kenobi. Like Obi-Wan, they were once among the greatest leaders and respected by all. Now they're basically an old hermit, waving their arms around, hoping spooking sand people is enough to carry them through. Someone should really strike them down, because most 49ers become far more interesting as commentators who are only a voice over the action. And rounding out the West, the Arizona Cardinals, who are basically like Jadzia Dax from Star Trek Deep Space Nine. They have been around for way longer than you think, and they currently have a youthful, sexy appearance despite their age, often involved with the main plot of a season in a supporting role, very rarely being the most important part of the story. In the end, they often get killed right before the end of the season to advance another team's story. And finally, the NFC North. We'll start with the Chicago Bears, who are an awful lot like Winnie the Pooh. They have a rumbly in their tumbly for some honey, or in the Bears' case, wins. They had one big hit back in the day that they're coasting on. One recent attempt to win was a noble effort, but it was just never going to happen. Much like poor Winnie's last film, which might go down as Disney's last 2D animated feature. Then we have the Green Bay Packers, who I could best describe as Batman. Like Batman, the Packers are the regular guy who maxed out all their skills and are able to play with the real metahumans. They're owned by regular people. They play better at night and in the cold, and can beat anyone with a bye week for preparation. Then you have the Minnesota Vikings, who are basically Beta Ray Bill. They kind of look like Thor, and have on occasion been worthy enough to wield Mjolnir, but more often than not, the Vikings are leaving fans with faces longer than Beta Ray Bill's. And lastly, the Detroit Lions, who, frankly, I'm flummoxed. I don't know who they're like. I was thinking maybe RoboCop, but he actually got a couple wins here and there. Maybe the Cowardly Lion, but at the end of the day, he found his courage. The Detroit Lions are, for lack of a better word, the worst. So there you have it. All 32 NFL teams and analogies that will help you, the nerd, understand who they are going into the 2017 NFL season. Please don't forget to tell me in the comments below how terribly wrong I am, and give me much better analogies that are ultimately way more thought out and original than my own. And don't forget to click on something on the screen. I'm sure the video is still playing right now and you're listening to me. Hi, Mom. I've got really nothing else. I think that if I've decided to put this audio in the video, it is out of just a lack of anything interesting to end on.